Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope all of you are doing very, very well today. So I'd like to continue with my comments on the Godzilla films that were presented in the Criterion collection set, Godzilla, the Showa era films, 1954 to 1975. It's a really interesting and exciting set for a number of reasons, and I've had the great honor of being able to talk about some thoughts I have about the set in particular. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to speak to you about the films in the set. In particular, I would like to provide to you my own personal ranking with respect to the Showa era films of Godzilla. I should emphasize that this ranking is merely my own preference, and I don't expect anyone to necessarily have the same ranking. This is again based on my own likes and dislikes. I have a certain sort of my own subjective viewpoint on Godzilla films, and so that means there are some Godzilla films I like and some I don't, and that's just my own nature. As it happens with the Showa era films, I, on the whole, like all of the films very much. I can say that there is no film in the Showa era that I hate. So all the films in the Showa era set are ones that I really like. The film that I will rank at number 15, which is the one that I like the least, I suppose, might sound like I don't like the film, but in fact I really do like the film. It's just that I think there are 14 other films in the Showa era set that are a little bit better. So I hope to talk to you about that a little bit over the course of the next video. Also, I should point out that I won't be including Godzilla King of the Monsters or the US release version of King Kong vs. Godzilla. I will leave those out for another day perhaps to discuss. I'd like to focus my attention here on the Japanese versions of the films as they are released, including the Japanese version of King Kong vs. Godzilla. So that means I will be focusing my energies today on the 15 Japanese release versions of the Showa era films of Godzilla. Perhaps another day I might have the chance to talk in detail about the US release version of Godzilla and the US release version of King Kong vs. Godzilla, as well as perhaps other films. One day, hopefully, I might have the opportunity. But for now, my friends, I just ask for your patience in allowing me to talk exclusively about the Japanese versions as they appear in the Showa era films, and also, therefore, by extension, as they appear in the Criterion collection set. So, without further ado, here is my list of films, and I will talk a little bit about the films going forward. I won't be talking too much about major spoilers perhaps, but please keep in mind that I will be talking about them a little bit, so there will be some mild spoilers in each of the films. So if you are wary of hearing spoilers about any of these films, I suggest that you turn off this video and wait until you've seen all the films before watching the rest of this video. I will leave the actual list in the description box below, so if you want just to look at the list, you can just look at the description box, and you can look at the list at your own pace and leisure, of course, without necessarily watching this video and hearing any comments that I have that might include any mild spoilers. So I will leave that option open to you. But in any event, my friends, please note that going forward, I will be, or at least it will be possible, there will be the possibility that I might mention some mild spoilers. So just take note of that for any of you who don't want to be spoiled by any of the Godzilla films. So with that in mind, my friends, here is my ranking of my favorite Godzilla Showa era films. Number 15, and before I move on, let me just point out that I will be relying on Japanese DVD releases that I have, which have the original poster art for DVD cover art. So it might be interesting to let you know about. So with that in mind, my friends, let me show you now number 15. This is the film Godzilla Raids Again. And this is from 1955. This was the first sequel to the original Godzilla from 1954, and it came almost immediately afterwards. It is a film that is directed by not Ishiro Honda, but Motoyoshi Oda. It has new stars in Hiroshi Koizumi and Minoru Chiaki. It also has a continuity with respect to the Dr. Yamane character, played by Takashi Shimura, who we saw in the first film. So he's reprising his role, and he's playing a sort of the expert in terms of what Godzilla is, and also what Anguirus is, the new monster here. There is also a kind of continuity with the first film in terms of the black and white photography, in terms of the similar looking Godzilla design, although it's not exactly the same, it is similar. We have to remember that this is a different monster than the original Godzilla film, and so we have a monster of the same species as it's posited in the film. Plus, of course, the addition of a new monster who is referred to in the film by some of the characters as Anguirus. And so we have the introduction of this idea of a kaiju monster fighting a kaiju monster within the film. It's played for a kind of subplot type of feel or effect. In other words, that monster versus monster action does not occupy the primary role of the film, if you will. It feels like something that is only part of the film. The other part of the film does deal with Godzilla and his rampage, this time on Osaka, and the results that follow. I have put this at number 15 because first of all, I like it very much. It might seem like I don't like it because I put it at number 15, but I do like it very much. It just so happens that I have 14 other films that I like a little bit better than this. The reason for that is, I think, for me, this feels like while it's a good film, it does feel like there are some aspects of the human drama that don't seem necessarily to fit with the kind of gravitas that I think some of the monster scenes are going for. I would, of course, concede the point that I don't see the entirety of this film aiming for the heaviness or the gravitas or the overwhelming sense of tragedy that, say, the first film had. I don't think it's aiming for the same heights of pathos as the first film, because it's more of a mixture of tones. There is a lightness, there's also some darkness, but there is undeniable lightness here. But I would suggest that some of the lightness and tone doesn't seem to mix well with the other aspects of the film, which are undeniably trying to reach certain similar heights of tragedy as the first film. We see destruction. We see the aftermath of monster chaos. We do see death and destruction committed on screen, of course. But this is all intermixed with other scenes of lightness, of laughing. I would suggest, for instance, that after the Osaka destruction, the film shifts rather abruptly to the storyline involving the pilots and Hokkaido, and there is a sort of drinking party there. So there doesn't seem to be any of the weight of the tragedy of the destruction of the city of Osaka once the film moves to another part of Japan. And so that feels a little bit abrupt to me. It feels a little bit off, but again, I think that overall the film is a good film, and it does provide some exciting action scenes in the mix. So it does have a little bit of some issues, at least as far as I can see it, in terms of the overall blend of tones, but overall it is still a good film. So even though I've put it at number 15, Godzilla Raids Again is still a film that I would recommend. Number 14. This is the film from 1969. This is All Monsters Attack. Now, once again, I've put this at number 14, so it might sound as though I am dismissing this film. But I want to emphasize the fact that I think this is a very, very good film. It is a very good film, and I'm almost a little bit saddened by the fact that I have to put it at number 14, but it just so happens that there are a number of films that I might prefer personally just a little bit more than this film, but I would still suggest that this is a worthwhile film. I put it here though because I think I must acknowledge that there are certain issues with the film's structure. There is a certain reliance on stock footage, which I cannot deny. I don't think it's overwhelming. I don't think it's detrimental or a fatal flaw to the film, but I do recognize its existence there, and I know that it is a kind of source of criticism of this film, and I think reasonably so. There is also a definite shift in tone from any of the other films preceding and following it, in that this film seems to be almost taking place, or not almost, it does take place in the sense that the monster scenes in the film take place within the imaginary world of this little boy. Therefore, it doesn't fall within the continuity of any of the films that preceded it or any of the films that followed it. In other words, the monsters don't exist in the world of the little boy and the human characters here. It all exists in his mind, more or less. So I can see how a lot of people might look at this as being an anomaly in the Godzilla Showa era films because of that kind of structure. But with that in mind, I still think it's worthwhile and praiseworthy because there are some, I think, rather interesting themes that are being taken into consideration with respect to Ichiro, the child character, the main character here, and the fact that both his mother and father are away from him, are not at home because they are busy working. So there is a sort of a financial situation of their family that prevents them from being able to spend more time at home, which means that the young boy is left alone for many of his hours. So that is, I think, an interesting issue that is being presented here in a kind of kids-like film. There is also the issue of bullying and how this young boy deals with the bullies from the other group, as it were. He seems to be retreating into his fantasy world of monsters on Monster Island, etc. But that is all, I think, fun and games, and it's all taken in good cheer. So it's all applied in a very almost zany almost comic book-like way. There is a certain caper aspect to the film in the sense that you have the two robbers that seem to be putting the boy in some situations of peril. But even these scenes too, I think, are played more or less for sort of lightness or lightheartedness. The boy is never seen in any real danger. The situations of peril are almost akin to, say, the film Home Alone, if you know this film from some years later. But this is to say that I think this is a very nice mixture of, or not a mixture, but this is a very experimental film in the context of the Showa era. But I think it works very well because there are some social themes that are being handled, and there is a real sincerity of approach. And I think we see this idea of how the monsters in the monster world are so important to this little boy, this idea of imagination being so important to this little boy, and protecting this little boy when he needs the most protection. That is a very sincere message, I think, and one that I think is very it's very full of a lot of earnestness. And I think that point alone by itself is enough for me to recommend this film. There is still monster action. Now, I've suggested that there's stock footage used, but not all the monster action is stock footage, of course. We do have a new monster, Ghidorah, and we have Manila, who is now talking with a very cute-sounding voice with Ichiro, the young boy. So there's that. I do love the little fight scenes that are being developed between Manila and Ghidorah. And I love that little arc that is played out. You know, Manila has to essentially fend for himself, and he tries to defend himself from Ghidorah, but he's not able to do so because Ghidorah is much stronger, and Ghidorah has some special powers with the electricity that runs through his body. And Godzilla doesn't help until the fight seems to be too one-sided in favor of Ghidorah. I love that detail when Godzilla doesn't help until he notices that Ghidorah is using his electric powers in order to subdue Manila. That's when Godzilla comes into action. So he waits until he sort of doesn't intervene until he sees that Ghidorah seems to be fighting unfairly, as it were. But I still love Manila's way of defeating Ghidorah, you know, using the log and having Ghidorah flip through the air. And when Ghidorah lands and Godzilla comes over to congratulate Manila, I love the little moment. I don't know if you noticed, but Godzilla gives the Ghidorah just a little kick in sort of celebration as he runs over to congratulate Manila, as it were. So I love those little details, and the Ghidorah's design is very interesting, and I like it very much. But I do appreciate the fact that this is light fare. This is not anything that is very heavy-handed. This is something that is more or less a kid's film. But at the same time, I must applaud it for its earnestness of approach and sincerity of what it's trying to do, at least what I think it's trying to do. So this is the film All Monsters Attack, and I have it at number 14. Number 13. This is the film from 1972. This is Godzilla versus Gigan. Now, I have this at number 13 because, well, let me just take a step back. Like with the other films, just because I have this rather low at number 13, respectively speaking, that doesn't necessarily mean that I loathe the film. I really like this film very much. I think it is very fast-paced. It has a lot of comic elements to it. There are some bits of menace there, I admit. There are some moments, not very extended moments, of course, but there are some moments of some on-screen kaiju on kaiju violence. There is a moment in particular where there's a little bit of blood spray, not too extended, but it is there. So, and that has to do with Gigan and his saw, his buzzsaw chest, which is an interesting design element. I'll get to that in a second. But there are also tones that are very lighthearted, that are almost comic. There are some nice touches with the sort of comic book manga theme, the main protagonist being an artist like that. That is also carried over into the famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, scene involving Godzilla and Anguirus, who are depicted here as being friends. But not only that, we see an actual dialogue between the two of them when the tape is being played, and the monsters all the way over on the island catch wind of this, and Godzilla tells Anguirus to go to the main island to see what's going on. Hurry, isoge. So the speech discussion is taking place using these speech bubbles in Japanese, in the Japanese print. So that's very much like it's patterning itself after manga and the use of speech bubbles. And this is one of the few occasions in the Showa era films where we see some talking from kaiju monsters. We've seen it in other films, but here is a very striking example of that. So it is very interesting in that way. We also get a really great tag team fight. This is, I think, the first time where we get a balanced fight between the two sides of the kaiju fighting. So we have the good guys and the bad guys. The good guys being represented, of course, by Anguirus and Godzilla, and then the bad guys being represented by Gigan and King Ghidorah. So we have the two of them there, or the two sides there, fighting almost on equal footing. Because all the way up to this, we've seen films where you have one monster battling another one monster, or we have 2-on-1, or sometimes more than 2-on-1. For instance, Destroy All Monsters is a good example of that. But here's the first time where I think we see an actual tag team fight between monsters. So that's really great. The design also of Gigan, the monster, his debut appearance, as it were, in this film, is really quite remarkable. He is, I think, one of the coolest looking kaiju villains in Godzilla's Rogue Gallery. And so the whole thing with the blades and the eye and the little buzzsaw thing there that's going on, I think that adds to his appeal as a designed monster that is really cool and menacing. And I think the Gigan design alone is what makes me really love this film. But I must say that there are also some tones in this film that I find a little bit interesting in terms of creative choices. The whole thing about the plot involving the tower that's shaped in a almost life-size Godzilla is a very interesting choice, although it's very hard for me to see how that necessarily fits into the rest of the work. It feels like a really nice element in and of itself, but it seems to be a little bit it doesn't seem to me to be I'm not quite sure what the aliens were necessarily going for in terms of using peace in order to conquer the world, as it were. I kind of get the idea much more easily when I think about the concept of, say, aliens trying to construct a Mechagodzilla, for instance. But here it's a little bit less clear to me. I don't think that's the main point. I think the whole point of the film is essentially setting that whole thing up as a kind of MacGuffin. So it doesn't really matter, actually, if it makes sense in the grand scheme of things. But I would contend that it doesn't necessarily make the biggest sense in the world. But be that as it may, there are still some intriguing elements. You know, the idea of the aliens and what their real appearance is, how they hide themselves or disguise themselves as human beings. It has a little bit of a mystery element to the film, which is interesting. So all this comes together, I think, in an interesting, almost eclectic mix of styles, but that is, I think, anchored by a real great menacing villain and a nice battle between the monsters in a tag team fashion. So that is a set of reasons why I have put at number 13 the film Godzilla vs. Gigan. Number 12. This is the film from 1967. This is the film Son of Godzilla. Son of Godzilla. So this is the introduction of Minilla, the so-called son of Godzilla, and we have the famous scene of Minilla hatched from his egg and already being attacked by some predator monsters that are roaming the area, of course. We have Godzilla and Minilla, and the scenes between the two of them, I think, are classic. They're classic scenes. I love the scenes between the two of them, how Godzilla is trying to teach Minilla to be a strong monster, how he's trying to teach him to blow the atomic breath, but Minilla doesn't seem to be getting the hang of it so far, so he tends to blow the famous rings rather than the breath until Godzilla stomps on him, and then he, out of pain or surprise or shock, he then bursts out his own atomic flame there, as an example. Then we also have the human element, and I really love this because we don't necessarily get any kind of melodramatic setup of any super villain in this film. I think all the human characters are essentially here on this island trying to, or the majority of them anyway, are trying to or be there for the scientific experiments. And so I love how you have this little teamwork action idea going, and not necessarily having a film that is propelled by some kind of plot involving a dastardly villain or something like that. Of course, those plots are still great. Don't get me wrong, I love those sorts of plots, but I find the lack of such a narrative structure as presented in this film to be very refreshing, and therefore I find it to be something of a positive when it comes to this film. And I think also we have a great monster nemesis in the form of Kumonga, that giant spider. Now, perhaps in the grand scheme of things, Kumonga is not necessarily the most memorable designed monster in the entire kaiju gallery. Okay, I can completely get that. But at the same time, one cannot deny that Kumonga is a very strong enemy. He's very strong, and there's a lot of threat that Kumonga poses. So, and there's a lot of menace, and he is spoken of in hushed tones by the humans at some point. And so I like how Kumonga is set up, and I like the fights between Kumonga and Minilla, Kumonga and Godzilla, and the like. So I really like those very much. I think it surprising strong adversary that Godzilla faces in this otherwise light-hearted film. So that is why I have put at number 12 the film Son of Godzilla. Next, number 11. This is the film from 1968. This is Destroy All Monsters. This is one of the most extravagant, exciting kaiju films ever. And that is due not in least part because of the amount of kaiju that appear in this film. You have so many monsters here. It is absolutely amazing. And to see all of them, or at least most of them anyway, being engaged in this sort of free-for-all fight. Their main focus is, of course, King Ghidorah, so they have that unifying them, of course. But King Ghidorah is a very strong foe here, and to see all the monsters, or most of them anyway, combine and join forces to try to stop him is really quite amazing. And then we have a nice science fiction type of intrigue story involving the alien race, the Kilaaks, and we've got this this wonderful performance by Akira Kubo, and then we have the sort of sinister elements of that, but it is never outdone, I think, by the wonderful lavishness of the monster production and the set pieces that are taking place. Incidentally, of course, we have so many destruction scenes of model carnage, if you will, with each of the monsters attacking a different part of the world at the beginning, and it's really amazing to see all this stuff come together in under one umbrella of a film, that is Destroy All Monsters. So I really think this is one of the most exciting films. I've put it at number 11, of course, though, because I do think that there are just some other films in the series that are just a little bit better for me personally, as my own personal preference. But I do still think that this is one of the classics of the genre. And if you are looking for a film to watch first, I mean, you can try to go in chronological order through the Showa era films, but if you find it difficult to go through all the films in chronological order, then I would probably suggest, as a one-stop shop, if you will, to try Destroy All Monsters, because it has a little bit of everything, I would suggest. And it has the aliens, it has all the monsters, it has the intrigue involving what the aliens want, and it has the different fighting styles, and it has a little bit of, not a lot, but a little bit of a human story there that is weighted with some emotional impact, etc. So it has a little bit of everything. So I would suggest this as being another place to go if you're looking to, say, dip your toe in the kaiju water, so to speak. But other than that, my friends, this is still, I think, a wonderful film, very exciting, and this is number 11, Destroy All Monsters. Next, this is number 10, released in Japan in 1962 in Japan. This is King Kong versus Godzilla. This is one of the most classic kaiju films, not least of which because it features not only Godzilla, but perhaps the granddaddy of them all, that is King Kong. King Kong is in many ways a great precursor to the kaiju monster films from Japan starting from the mid-1950s. So to have King Kong together with Godzilla in the same film is really quite amazing, absolutely amazing. So there is a lot of anticipation built up with this film. There's a lot of references to, well, who would win in a match between the two of them, kind of wrestling odds sort of thing. That is even set up, this is a sort of conversation that some of the characters in the film talk about. So there's already, even within the film world itself, an acknowledgement of how epic this matchup between two titans is. So this is great. This is also, of course, the return of a Godzilla film since 1955's Godzilla Raids Again. So you had a period of some years between these Godzilla films. Of course, you had other kaiju films in the interim, but as far as a Godzilla film is concerned, this emerged only after some years had passed since 1955's Godzilla Raids Again. And now we have Godzilla back in full color, and it was a grand spectacle, and it still is. So I think what I would say that some of the human drama story is, while it's good and there are a lot of comic elements to it, I do understand, or I appreciate the possibility that perhaps some of the comedy might not necessarily translate as well as other parts of the film. I don't know, it might translate, but I do appreciate the possibility that it might not necessarily translate all the way. And so that might be seen as being something going against the film, albeit mildly so. There are also some elements of the romance between the characters, some of the characters there that I don't necessarily think it could have been the best that it could have been. You know, it's the Miyahama character is so worried that she herself goes to Hokkaido, or tries to go to Hokkaido, which then leads into her being under direct threat by Godzilla, which is a little bit, I don't know, it's a little bit of an interesting turn of the narrative. And then she just happens to find herself in the hands of King Kong a few scenes later, which is also an interesting turn of the narrative. I understand it's a film, but there is still some, I don't know, there's some stretches there for, let me just say there are some stretches there that are a little bit stretched out, let me put it that way. But those are minor points. And I think the major points being the epic fights between King Kong and Godzilla being the focal point here, I think anchor this film in a way that makes it very stellar, very exciting. We see thinking. King Kong thinks when he realizes that Godzilla has a very powerful atomic breath, and he has to think, how is he going to defeat Godzilla? There's a little bit of an interesting thing that happens in terms of King Kong and lightning and electricity, which we will find out is something that will be applied to the character of Godzilla in later films, starting in, for instance, Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. But here we see it as being something of a strength for Kong, as a means of trying to defeat Godzilla at that second and final battle between the two of them. So we have these interesting developments of kaiju lore that are already being sewn here in the fabric of this film. So there is a lot going for it, and once again, I cannot emphasize strongly enough just how epic seeing these two titans of monster cinema together like this. So this is number 10, King Kong versus Godzilla. Number 9, this is from 1966. This is the film Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. This is the first film in the series that is directed by Jun Fukuda, who will go on to direct a number of other films in the series. This is a film where we have Godzilla dealing with an island, rather than dealing with the actual main part of Japan, and we have the inhabitants of this island being the Red Bamboo group. So this is an interesting thing. So the Red Bamboo group are already identified as being the bad guys of the film, and you have all their installations on the island, and they're all set up there. They have their own air force, etc. So this is an interesting thing, right? Because we see Godzilla at some points in the film trampling over these installations on this island. So for the first time, I think we see Godzilla not necessarily destroying buildings of innocent persons, but rather we see Godzilla attacking buildings that are belonging to the acknowledged bad guys of the film. So that's an interesting take on the Godzilla phenomenon, if you will. It further cements the idea that Godzilla is a good guy and is not a bad guy. So that is an interesting development. Also, we have the idea of Godzilla and electricity and lightning as being a sort of source of energy, which is now acknowledged. You know, in the past we've seen electricity as being used by the Japan Self-Defense Forces as a means of trying to repel Godzilla in terms of you know, this installing these power lines, right? And in almost every movie, it seems like the army is trying to repel Godzilla by electrifying these wires in order to prevent Godzilla from penetrating this perimeter. But it doesn't ever work, does it? Well, in fact, I think the answer is now in Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, because we see that electricity is in many ways a form of strength for Godzilla. And we saw something similar like that with King Kong versus Godzilla, with the King Kong character, of course. But here we get it directly for Godzilla. And the design of Ebirah, the enemy here, is really quite great. It's a giant lobster, but it's a giant lobster done very well, and there are some interesting exchanges between Godzilla and Ebirah involving a rock and involving other scenes underwater and the like. So there are some quite inventive things going on. Also some inventive things going on with the presentation, the music. There is a particular moment when the planes are attacking Godzilla, and for a very interesting reason, the score suddenly turns into the surf music type of thing, which is very interesting too. Again, the airplanes that are attacking are acknowledged as being by the bad guys, so it's not like there's a sense of tragedy or sadness when Godzilla destroys the planes necessarily, but it adds to a kind of playfulness, sort of a like playing games or cops and robbers type of thing, that is part of the entire, I think, atmosphere of the film, more or less, which is very interesting, and it makes the film, I think, very playful, very energetic. Also, there are moments where Godzilla, I think, is humanized. Remember, there's scenes between Godzilla and Dio, which is I think something very similar to some of those scenes that we saw in King Kong, for instance. But here in Godzilla, Ebirah, Heart of the Deep, we see Godzilla almost fancying Dio, or maybe just being fascinated by Dio and what she is. And he sits down and he does that thing, rubbing the corner of his eye, etc., or rubbing his nose or something. So there are some moments of humanizing with respect to the Godzilla character, which further cements his role as a good guy in the series. So this is, I think, all very, very great and very exciting, and a nice, fun approach to the Godzilla series. So this is at number 9, Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. Number 8. This is the film from 1965. This is Invasion of Astro-Monster. Now, I mentioned before about Destroy All Monsters and how it had this idea of the aliens trying to conquer the world by using the monsters that are that have some kind of mind control, and using the monsters to try to destroy the planet. Well, the plot of Invasion of Astro-Monster is almost identical to the plot of Destroy All Monsters. So it's an interesting point of comparison if you're looking to compare the two films. I would suggest that, at least for me anyway, Invasion of Astro-Monster is the film that I really, really like, because I like both of them, but I really, really like Invasion of Astro-Monster. I think there is a great alien design with the Planet X aliens, with the clothing and the black band over their eyes and their sort of hand gestures, especially the controller of Planet X, Yoshio Tsuchiya, the great actor, and he has these almost mime type of movements, which is really quite eerie and effective, and it adds to that sort of campy feel. This is almost the quintessential Japanese camp science fiction film in many respects, not primarily due to that wonderfully wacky design of the Planet X aliens. And so well done to this film for cementing that indelible image in my mind and in the minds of many other Godzilla fans out there in the world. Also, there's a lot of really great special effects pieces here, because in the Showa era films, we have to remember that this is the first film where we actually go into outer space for the first time. We see ships flying in space, we go to different planets, we go to see different races, alien races. So it's all very exciting. And then you add into the mix, you have Godzilla and Rodan, trying to fight King Ghidorah. And then ultimately you have the monsters under some kind of mind control, then attacking Earth. But then suddenly the mind control is disrupted, and then their fighting with King Ghidorah can be allowed to resume. So it's an interesting, almost dramatic flip, if you will, in terms of the use of monsters. But it's also wonderful. There are some, of course, very classic moments in this film. We have the return of King Ghidorah. We have the return of Rodan, two of the more popular kaiju in the Godzilla universe, or the Toho Kaiju Tokusatsu universe. We also have some really classic moments of the lifting off of Godzilla and Rodan from the watery depths in those little bubbles, and to take them off into outer space. It's a classic scene. We also have, after the first battle between Godzilla and Rodan, and then King Ghidorah, and King Ghidorah is flying away in defeat, Godzilla, of course, does his celebratory jump up and down. And I know a lot of people might look at this as being really, really silly, but this does add to it does add a sense of comic book levity to this film. It adds a sense of Godzilla and humanizing the monster, makes him be even more of a hero in terms of his celebrating mood. And he becomes very likable and approachable and very lovable. So it's a nice touch, I think. I love it. I think it's a great touch. Then, of course, what makes this film, I think, really, really great is, on top of that, there is a really fantastically emotional human story that's at the heart of this film. In particular, the story that involves the Namikawa character and the astronaut Glenn character, the Nick Adams character, and Kumi Mizuno character. I think that's a really great storyline, and one of the classics. I think I think of the sort of romantic storylines in all of the Showa era films, this could be one of the most compelling of those storylines, the one that's included here in Invasion of Astro-Monster. And so I think that also adds to the film's overall appeal. So Invasion of Astro-Monster is a really fine film, iconic in many, many ways, and it's so important in the context of the Showa era films, and so that is why I have put it at number 8. Number 7. This is from 1973. This is the film Godzilla vs. Megalon. This is a super campy film. This is a campy film to the max. It could be perhaps the campiest film in the Godzilla Showa era series. It could be. There are so many elements that are very wacky. There are some weird elements here in terms of for instance, the plot of the aliens here, or the bad guy menace, if you will. Although Seatopia, I would contend, is not necessarily a world of bad people. They are just protesting against what they see to be injustice from all the sort of nuclear testing that has been happening by the human race up top, as it were. So they are just using that in order to, that is their reasoning for wanting to unleash Megalon in the world, as it were. So perhaps the villains of the piece are not as villainous as one might think. They are perhaps maybe even more sympathetic than one might think. So there is perhaps some layer of complexity here that is worth considering. But, I mentioned the campy elements of this film. There is the very bright design of Jet Jaguar, the friend to Godzilla. There is the interesting use of music. There's the way in which the fights between the monsters progress, culminating in one of the most interesting drop kick shots in all of film history, I would contend, that being the Godzilla dropkick. Not just once, of course, but he does that drop kick that goes all the way across there. So that is an interesting move that we've never seen from Godzilla up to now. We've seen some pretty interesting uses of his powers up to now, but that is really quite a remarkable move, almost jujitsu-like perhaps. But my point is that there is a lot of fun, campy stuff going on here. It's nonsensical, but it is very fun, and I would suggest, therefore, that its fun aspect, if you can accept its campy aspects, this film is very fun, and is one of the most fun films in the series. Godzilla is lively here. Godzilla is very he's ready to go. The main character, perhaps more than Godzilla, might be Jet Jaguar, and Jet Jaguar is so wonderful in his earnestness. He is so cute in his uprightness, perhaps. He is not necessarily the strongest friend in Godzilla's friends gallery there. Granted, he is not really that strong, but granted, he was also trying to fight against Gigan and Megalon, and perhaps there was a bit of and he did hold his own there for a little bit, of course, but perhaps he was too overpowered, maybe dealing with a little bit of inexperience as well. So in many ways, Jet Jaguar is the underdog of the entire Showa era, and so that makes me want to root for him all the more, and that makes me want to root for this film all the more. It's starring, of course, Katsuhiko Sasaki, who's a very famous actor. He's also known for being the son of Minoru Chiaki, so there's another connection with Godzilla, as, of course, Chiaki appeared in Godzilla Raids Again as the pilot Kobayashi. He was also one of the Seven Samurai in the Kurosawa film Seven Samurai. And so the acting, I think, is very good, given the fact that this is still considered, relatively speaking, a light-hearted Godzilla film. There are some sinister moments, especially at the beginning, where you have the destruction of what seems to be the monster island, whatever this island is. We see Anguirus, who sinks to the bottom there. We don't quite know what happens to Anguirus. It could be reasonable to assume that Anguirus died in that, although we do see Anguirus appear again in the next film, which is Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. But there are some moments, yes, of not necessarily darkness, but it does go into, or does tend to want to go into certain dark places, only to be pulled back into the light again, as it were. And it has one of the great ending songs in any Godzilla film, the Jet Jaguar song, which is really lovely. I have very fond memories of this film growing up, and the Jet Jaguar song is really wonderful. If I can find a karaoke place in Tokyo that has that song, I will never fail to sing that, and so it always makes me very happy. This film is a film that makes me very, very happy, and so I don't hesitate to put it at number 7. Number 6. This is the film from 1964. This is Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster. Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster is at my number 6. I absolutely adore this film. This has a lot of great things going for it. The introduction of one of the great adversaries in all of kaiju cinema, King Ghidorah. He is the ultimate in many ways. And the design of King Ghidorah is wonderful, so menacing, so memorable, so iconic. And to have King Ghidorah here in this film, amazing. We also have the return of Rodan, And so we have Rodan thrown into the mix. We also have Mothra thrown into the mix, which is really quite lovely. And then, of course, we have Godzilla. And this is a very interesting point, because this film shows the relationship among the monsters. In particular, Godzilla and Rodan. Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra. And also we see a glimpse as to how the kaiju think about humanity. They think that humanity is not worth saving because humans always attack them. And so they feel like they are the ones who are being attacked. And so there is that wonderful exchange, of course, very famous, where Mothra is trying to appeal to Rodan and Godzilla to join forces to stop King Ghidorah, who is the ultimate menace to the entire world. You don't want Ghidorah to do to the Earth what Ghidorah did to the planet Venus, right? So this is, in many ways, such a groundbreaking kaiju film, and it is the moment, right, where Godzilla becomes a good guy. He started out as a foe, but he turned into a friend because of the efforts of Mothra and company. So a really wonderful mix. And then you also have the intrigue involving the Princess Salno, played by the actress Akiko Wakabayashi, and you have that lovely, almost Audrey Hepburn Roman holiday type of storyline with her and her amnesia and her becoming the wandering prophet, as it were. And then you have the whole plot line with the Detective Shindo, as it were, and that develops really nicely, and it culminates in a lovely moment where you have the resolution between these two characters, which is very similar to the resolution of the Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn character in Roman Holiday. So it's very poignant, and surprisingly so. So and that is also accompanied by wonderful moments of action and suspense that exist throughout the film. So this is to say that there's a wonderful mix of a human story and the kaiju story, and I think that balance really works out very nicely. So therefore, my friends, I have at number 6, Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. Number 5, this is 1975. This is the film Terror of Mechagodzilla. Terror of Mechagodzilla from 1975. So after a string of films that were directed by Jun Fukuda, there is Yoshimitsu Banno, and then there's also Jun Fukuda. Ishiro Honda came back and directed this film, Terror of Mechagodzilla, which is a kind of return to form in terms of darkness, or bringing darkness back into the series. And I would suggest that this is perhaps one of the darkest films, if not the darkest film, since the original Godzilla from 1954. A really fascinating turn in terms of the tone and approach that the filmmakers behind the Godzilla series were trying to go for. The way in which the human characters are being manipulated, the way in which characters are introduced and then die, the way in which human relationships are thwarted for the sake of the narrative. In particular, of course, the relationship between the main character Ichinose, Akira Ichinose, who is played again by Katsuhiko Sasaki, and then also the female character, the Katsura character, Tomoko Ai. And that is the key relationship in the film, of course. But it is backed up by another key relationship in the film, which is the the father-daughter relationship between Katsura on the one hand, the daughter, and the father figure, Dr. Mafune, who's played by the legendary Akihiko Hirata in one of his most over-the-top flamboyant performances in all of the Godzilla films. It's really wonderful to behold. So, but what is interesting about this is the human story is so inextricably linked with the monster story because of the whole idea of the mind control and the need of introducing a human element to Mechagodzilla, the whole thing about Titanosaurus and the link between Titanosaurus and Katsura, the link between Mechagodzilla and Katsura, and all that stuff. It's all like over the top stuff, but I mean, the Godzilla series was so drawn out by this period. I mean, where could it go but to this sort of corner? And I applaud the series of being able to still find new ways of surprising us, even at this very late stage, the last stage of the Showa era films, as it were. So then, of course, we have the wonderful monster action. Titanosaurus is, I think, one of the more memorable and perhaps even underappreciated kaiju in all of the Godzilla films. You know, I think Titanosaurus, this is his only appearance in the Showa era films, of course, and very strong in terms of how he uses that mouth of his and the like, and he has a very memorable growling sound, which sounds almost like a curdling gurgle or something. So overwhelming, perhaps, that he makes Mechagodzilla take a back seat in the film that has Mechagodzilla in the title. So that's how strong Titanosaurus is. Mechagodzilla, of course, is one of the greatest foes in all of Godzilla history, so to see him back in action is really great. And I love the bit where Godzilla does what he did at the end of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla in terms of taking off the head, but here there's a surprise for Godzilla even after the head is taken off. Mechagodzilla still has a number of surprises up his sleeve, and I love those little surprises there. And then Godzilla. Godzilla is the supreme hero. He is given the almost the heroic music of Ifukube that was given to the humans in the original Godzilla film, but now it's given to him properly. And so this is an acknowledgement of Godzilla and cementing his place as a kaiju hero, as it were, protecting the world against the threat of Titanosaurus and Mechagodzilla and the aliens that are behind this potential menace to the world. So this is a great film. It has a poignant send-off of Godzilla. Perhaps the film didn't mean to be the last film in the Showa era like this, but despite that, its final shot is memorable and haunting and quite emotional. It has a beautiful score. It has some of the most darkest set pieces in terms of the narrative developments, some great action pieces, and so this is all to say that I have no hesitation of putting at number 5, Terror of Mechagodzilla. Number 4, 1964. The film is Mothra versus Godzilla. Mothra versus Godzilla is such a delightful film for a number of reasons. I think the main reason is we have the emergence of one of the great kaiju in all of the Toho cinema history, which is Mothra, and all of the myth that surrounds Mothra with the Shobijin and the development of the Mothra creature from the larva stage all the way up to the full winged stage, as it were. The idea of the short life cycle and life and death and life and death and life again. So there's a twinge of sadness, but there is also a sense of hope and also reemergence and awakening from the ashes and those sorts of things. which is given a wonderful musical tone with the singing and the chanting that adds a kind of soul to this film, which is really quite beautiful, refreshing, and very emotional. And then we have that coupled with the excitement of the action scenes of Godzilla, the emergence of Godzilla from the grounds and the depths after the wake of the typhoon is just a sight to behold. So exciting, and the way that Godzilla is such a big threat here is incredible, and the way in which Godzilla is thwarted is also a sight to behold. So there is a beautiful mix of soul and excitement, of emotion and thrilling entertainment. That is why I think this film works very well. Even the human story, the human story with with the reporter and the photographer, and also the corrupt businessmen and investor and all that. So there is a potential for the film going into unnecessary humor, as it were, but it never goes overboard with that. And I think on the contrary, there is a lot of sort of there's a lot of darkness lurking underneath. The way in which that the investor businessman storyline is fully closed is actually quite dark. There is also a dark, sinister edge with respect to innocents' lives that are under threat from monster damage, etc. So all this stuff keeps us on edge. Perhaps by the film's very final act, the film might be seen to be suffering from a little bit of, here are the main characters just standing around and watching what's going on syndrome, which is very prevalent in a lot of these films. So in other words, perhaps the main characters might seem to be sidelined at the very end in favor of other parts of action in other parts of the film. But I think that's a very minor criticism in the overall effect of this film, which, as I say, is very grand, very ambitious, but also very soulful, full of heart, and full of a lot of emotion. So this is number 4, Mothra versus Godzilla. Number 3. This is a film from 1971, the only film in the series directed by Yoshimitsu Banno. This is the film Godzilla vs. Hedorah. This is my number 3, one of my favorite films of the Godzilla Showa era, and one of my favorite Godzilla films ever. This is a kind of controversial film in the sense that, generally speaking, this film tends to be polarizing. Some people really love it. Some people really hate the film because it's seen as also being a kind of campy film, a film that is a little bit all over the place. And some people even consider it to be one of the worst films ever made. I completely get those criticisms, don't get me wrong, but I would suggest that this film has so much more. First of all, there is much more kaiju action in this film than in any other of the Godzilla films. If you notice, most of the film is dealing with a lot of the action and rampage of Hedorah and also Godzilla, and the idea of them fighting is really one of the big set pieces of the film. So it doesn't have this notion of human story kaiju, but I think it's essentially a monster story with some human elements in between, if you know what I mean. So the main focus is the monster element, Hedorah. Speaking of Hedorah, this is one of the most interesting designs in any kaiju film in terms of the different forms of Hedorah, starting from little Hedorahs and then growing and then having this beast that swims around, which is almost as sinister like Jaws, sharks swimming through the ocean. There are some scenes in this film that almost remind me of Steven Spielberg's Jaws and Amity Island or something. So it's really quite remarkable. And then we have flying Hedorah, and then we have full-grown Hedorah with those red eyes, bulging at red eyes, and the wonderful design, and the idea of Hedorah spewing out poisonous mud, poisonous air, poisonous gas that basically kills anyone on impact. Immediately melts their flesh until they become just bone. It's really quite a memorable, impactful kaiju monster in more ways than one. So Hedorah is one of the great adversaries in all of Godzilla films, and it really goes to work on Godzilla, right? I mean, melts off part of his hand, and he melts off one of his eyes, and it's kind of oozing and smoking and all this stuff. It's quite gruesome, actually. So that's to say that this film, Godzilla vs. Hedorah, is really one of the most gruesome, violent films in the Showa era. But it is also filled with a lot of spunky life. There is a great song that is has an environmental theme to it. There are some real, almost psychedelic scenes that are quite inscrutable. We had some scenes of people suddenly wearing masks or something, like fish masks, or turning into aquatic life or something. We have the monster that melts flesh, and we have all this mud and the weird optimistic sounding score with almost these booming tuba-like noises, and we have Godzilla and strategy, needing to bring Hedorah into these electric fields in order to weaken Hedorah. We have the weird mystery of what are those white balls inside Hedorah. We have the wonderful scene, or infamous depending on your point of view, scene of how Godzilla uses his atomic breath in a very unique way to fly, which we've never seen, and I don't think we will ever see again in the Showa era. And so there are some really big chances that this film takes, really big chances, and it does so really well and very entertainingly. And there's a spirit of adventurousness in the filmmaking, no holds barred. Let us do things we have never done before, even to the little things, like there's a little scene with the little boy playing at the very beginning. You can even see an Ultraman doll hanging from the roof there, which is an interesting little detail. And there's animation, and there is also a kind of a playful, almost meta quality to this film, it's almost just shocking just how far this film pushes the envelope in many ways. There's even a shot of, let me just stop there, but there is so much over-the-topness in this film that makes this unforgettable. Absolutely an unforgettable experience. And so this makes me love the film. And as a result, my friends, I have put this at number 3. So, once again, my number 3 is Godzilla vs. Hedorah. Number 2. This is from 1954. This is the film Godzilla, Gojira. This is the one that started it all. This is the granddaddy of the kaiju monster film. This is the granddaddy of the Toho tokusatsu film, and this has so much power to this film, to its images and to its story. This holds a lot of emotional weight even now. It is amazing how well this film holds up to multiple viewings, even today. This is a remarkable achievement of cinema. This is a remarkable achievement in sort of action-adventure films, of special effects films, and what's so striking is how powerful it is. We see the cause and effect of violence and destruction. We see human suffering firsthand. We see death firsthand. We see the consequences of death firsthand. Crying children, injured people, death and destruction, destroyed buildings. We don't just see them, we feel the impact and effect of it. We don't just see Godzilla, but we feel its impact all the way down to the radioactivity of the footprints. And so those little details remind us of the threat and the power and the awe of the atomic age and the Cold War age, from which the whole image and metaphor of Godzilla arose during this time. And when we keep that in mind as we watch this film, and the film reminds us of this all the time with those little details, but when we keep this in mind, this film gains a kind of power and awesomeness that is undeniable to this day. And there are so many tricks of this film that are even now breathtaking in terms of their boldness and audacity and sheer breadth of scope and ambition. This film is a towering achievement, and it is a miracle. And the way in which it still holds its tragic emotional impact even now is so amazing. So, my friends, this is the famous film Godzilla, 1954. But if Godzilla is number 2, then that means that there's one film left that is number 1. And this is my favorite Showa era film from the Godzilla series. This is Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. This is my favorite film in the Showa era series, period. This has it all. This has excitement, adventure, mystery, aliens. It's got a great Godzilla story. It has great kaiju battles, bloody battles with a lot of bloodletting. There's a lot of intrigue. There is a new character in terms of King Caesar, who provides the impetus for a lot of the mystery and action-adventure elements of the human drama of the film. All that stuff. But what makes this film go over the top for me is that it is the introduction of my favorite adversary in all of Godzilla's rogues gallery, Mechagodzilla. Mechagodzilla is such a fascinating character. What a villain. Mechagodzilla's entrance in the film is just heart-poundingly exciting. The way the music is entwined with that very moment, the Masaru Sato music, and entwined in that moment is remarkable. Even up to then, we have these inklings of why is Godzilla acting in this fiendish way, attacking poor Anguirus in such a bloody fashion, and the like, until we realize that there are two Godzillas, but no, wait, one of them is an imposter, and yes, it is Mechagodzilla. And once Mechagodzilla is revealed in true form, oh boy, we see one of the strongest foes ever, equipped to the brim with all the high-tech weaponry that you can imagine. It is just impervious, just super strong, and what a fight we get. We get two big fights between Mechagodzilla and Godzilla. And they end very bloodily, and it's quite shocking the way that the fight scenes they progress, but they are so satisfying, and they serve as a kind of they serve as two great anchors to this human story that is almost just madcap in terms of the James Bond style action that is involved, but also the odd nature of the Planet of the Apes style of the aliens, the mixture of the Okinawan legend plotline that then becomes King Caesar, the whole thing of singing to King Caesar in order to wake him, the idea of the alien layer and the space titanium and and the pipe and all this stuff, and Interpol and all the Interpol officers and stuff. It almost falls apart in terms of how bloated the film feels, in that there are so many characters and so many threads going on. It's almost confusing. It's hard for me to keep track exactly what's going on at what particular moment. There are double crosses and triple crosses going on. We are fooled into thinking one thing, but in fact the film really is showing something else going on. So there's a lot of double play and playfulness to this film, the way it presents information. But so that is the wonderful engaging nature of the human element of the film. But as I say, this is anchored by some of the greatest kaiju fights in the entire Godzilla series, let alone the Showa era. And it's got a great score. Masaru Sato does a great job. Akira Ifukube, of course, is the master in terms of scoring, being the great composer of the Godzilla series, of course. But Masaru Sato's score here is just undeniably awesome. And the direction by Jun Fukuda. Of course, Ishiro Honda was the master director of many of the Godzilla films and one of the architects of the Godzilla universe under the Showa era. But Jun Fukuda here is directing a remarkable film, and it is my favorite of the Showa era. So this is the film from 1974. This is the film Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. Okay, my friends, so that's it as far as my brief rundown of a ranking of the films, my favorite films in the Showa era. Again, this is my list, so I'm pretty sure that there might be differences of opinion, but that's okay. If you want, please feel free to share with me your own list, your own rankings of your favorite Godzilla films from the Showa era. Please feel free to leave them below in the comment section. I would love to hear what it is you have to say. So, with that, my friends, be well, and until we meet again, please be happy and healthy, and please, please, please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. So until we meet again, my friends, cheers.